So I am Stephanie Lynch, and my single greatest focus now has been respirator fit testing. So I participate in a lot of committees and do a lot of stuff with the goal of just where people are using respirators, that they're getting used effectively and providing, as much protection as they're capable of. But a big part of this, or maybe like something that's very daunting to people, is actually just putting together their respiratory protection program, which is definitely not a small feat. So, why do we care about how to do this program? Well, one of the biggest reasons is, of course, because of regulation, right?
Yeah.
So consistently, respiratory protection is in the top five uh, violations from OSHA. And actually, for most of these citations, the single biggest factor is someone just not doing something. So, whether it's not having a respiratory protection program in place or not documenting something, not performing fit testing, usually it's actually just not doing something that's the violation. So I'm hoping that if we just get more information out there to make it a little bit easier to build your program and easily see, the steps, that then that'll help you stay in compliance, but then also, improve your use of your respirators in your program. So as far as OSHA is concerned, what you're going to have to do is have a program that is developed, and it's going to have to be written down, right? Like according to the government, basically, if you didn't document it, then it didn't happen. So you want that written down. It's going to have to be specific to your work site. It's going to have to say when and where you're using respirators. You have to update that program on a regular interval or at any time that you've changed something. And of course, you have to have a respiratory protection program administrator. Now, that person can have the focus of just being the administrator of that, or they can be the one that is, responsible for a vast amount of the things. It kind of just depends. I've seen this fall on safety managers. I've seen this fall on occupational health folks. I've seen this fall on industrial hygienists. So that person just needs to be what OSHA says qualified, so very vague, but have the ability to oversee that program and evaluate it effectively. Another thing, obviously, is that you're going to have to provide your respirators that are appropriate for your hazard. You're going to have to provide training on their use and their maintenance. And then you're also going to have to provide medical clearance, medical evaluations, and all that's at no cost to your employees. As far as that program administrator, they're going to be responsible for the maintenance of that documentation. And they basically ensure that your program is running smoothly. And this just keeps, from the government's perspective, it provides a single point of contact for when they do need to come in and check on compliance. But it also, from your perspective, is going to help centralize a lot of that stuff. And then it makes it a lot harder for things to get skipped. So this point of contact is very important. There are other programs that maybe could run effectively with different things on different people's shoulders, but having this single person responsible for the overall program is really helpful. Again, they're not necessarily responsible for absolutely everything that you're doing with your program, because as you'll see, it's almost a little bit funny seeing these listed out so simply because they're huge undertakings, each and every one of them. When we talk about how we select our respirators, that's a very involved process where you're looking at, hazard evaluation. We'll talk about that. And then medical evaluations, that's another, big deal. If you have anyone who's checks yes on basically anything on the checklist, then they're going to have to be seen most likely. So it can get very, very involved. I've seen this done in-house. I've seen it done, sending out of house to clinics. So obviously that's just something that the program administrator is sort of coordinating and, not necessarily managing that part, right? They're not going to be your healthcare person who's going to actually provide them with the clearance to wear the respirator. Another important thing to note here is there are some proposed changes to the medical evaluation requirement. So currently, OSHA has proposed, and I guess the notice of public rulemaking will come out in August, last I heard, but is proposing that medical evaluations no longer be required for the use of loose-fitting PAPRs, so powered air purifying respirators, or for the filtering face piece respirators. I don't see anything that up to this point, I haven't seen anything that would make that not go through. But I will say that the public rulemaking process, so once it goes out for, the notice, I think that they get a chance to take some responses, and I have seen that go interestingly. So, so there's a chance that something could change in that. You have to have all of your procedures for how you're using your respirator, both for your routine exposures and then for any foreseeable emergency situations. Also, how you take care of your respirators, maintain them, anything that you might need to do if you're using air supplying respirators for the quality of the air, all of your training stuff, and yeah, then also having the process in place for how you're going to evaluate your program and at what interval. I would say most people do it annually. Okay, for the selection of your respirators, again, this kind of feels like this is too simple a way of putting it, but you're going to do your hazard assessment. So you need to know all of your inhalation hazards that you have on site, and you need to quantify those. So that's a good question, Michael. Did we submit for CEUs with the Deep South Center?
We did not. I didn't know that we could, but we could.
Michael, we might be able to. Yes, we typically do those through the Deep South Center, and I'm actually not sure if we did. And Jason, I think I should just go ahead and answer that because I don't think I go back into medical evaluation. So Jason asks, isn't part of the medical evaluation identifying any medical issues? If that goes away, how are medical issues being identified? Well, the medical evaluation, the clearance, is making sure that it's safe to wear the respirator. And according to OSHA, those FFRs aren't putting as much breathing resistance. They don't have the same issues as the other ones. So they're saying that it's just not the same. And the loose fitting powered air purifying respirators, same thing. They're saying that that's not providing the same level of breathing resistance and that it's not creating the same burden. And so therefore those quote, medical issues don't need to be identified. I don't really know how I feel on, one end or the other. I will say that when I've worn FFRs, it still feels like a burden to me. So I would probably still want to go through a medical clearance. But, it's not saying that you can't. I think they're just saying that it's not going to be a requirement. And I think this was a big push from healthcare, is my understanding.
Yeah.
And we have someone else who's asked, how often are medical clearances required to be completed? I think OSHA, in its wonderful OSHA fashion, has also managed to leave that quite vague. So the medical clearance is required before you can use the respirator. And then, and then
you don't have to repeat it.
Yeah, they kind of act like you don't have to repeat it. I think there might be some language in there that says like, and as necessary, maybe something like that. But again, just very vague. So it's not like it's required annually as part of the program maintenance. I think annually is probably a good practice, but I don't think it's required by OSHA to do it annually. Okay, so going back to selecting your respirators, you have to perform a hazard assessment. That's quantifying all of your inhalation hazards on your site, figuring out which level of protection is required for those hazards. So based on whichever exposure limit you're referencing, and then you choose the appropriate respirator type. So hazard assessment is a huge process all in its own. You're going to have to, again, identify your hazards, evaluate them, recommend some actions. Of course, respirator use should be your very last line of defense. It's a type of personal protective equipment. So for any of those inhalation hazards where you see an overexposure, you're going to implement controls, and then if there's residual exposure, that's when you're going to implement the use of respiratory protection. And then you're also going to want to make sure you're on a regular interval to reevaluate the hazards, if anything changes, or maybe at least annually. We did have someone just drop in the chat now that for most occupational med facilities, OCMed facilities, are going to give you a 3-year expiration on the respiratory protection medical clearance unless they have underlying medical conditions. So that's something that the clinics themselves are imposing, which makes sense, right? I imagine there's a little amount of like liability that would go with that, and so them implementing an interval at which to do that, I think is good.
I think so. Caleb also said that he goes to a 3M site and they make him do it annually.
Okay. I mean, I think annually is a great idea. I just don't think that it's what's required.
Yeah.
OSHA is always that bare minimum, right? That's just to meet the bare minimum level of compliance. We're always able to go above and beyond, and we should. I'll actually get into that a little bit, talking about these occupational exposure limits and assigned protection factors. So when you go and implement your controls, you want to follow the hierarchy of controls, which of course is, again, respirators are that very last line. So anything you can do to actually physically remove the hazard, so eliminate it. If there's something you can do to substitute some sort of whatever, maybe you're using a chemical for something that's less hazardous. If you can separate separate the people from the hazard, so isolation, engineering it out is another very common thing. If there's something you can do, for inhalation hazards, there's all sorts of ventilation options there. Administrative controls where you have processes in place to change the way that people interact with that hazard, and then, our respiratory protection. So this is where I want to talk about, so assigned protection factors. This is in OSHA kind of simply laid out, which is good, but it still can be, a little bit confusing. But the way that it works on a very basic level, I don't see a lot of quarter masks used. I do see some used now. For some reason, they've sort of had a resurgence in mining, I think, in particularly. So quarter mask kind of sits on your chin and then just covers your nose. So it's like smaller than the half mask. So I'm seeing those a little bit of a resurgence. I saw some research on those too, trying to get their assigned protection factor actually bumped up to that 10 level to be equivalent with the half mask, which includes the filtering face piece respirators. But anyway, kind of gotten a little bit off track there. But so if you went out and did some measurement for benzene, for instance, if you got a measured time-weighted average of exposure for an employee of 6 parts per million, well, it wouldn't be limited to an employee, but you get what I'm saying. This is making for some simple math. The permissible exposure limit currently in OSHA's regulation is 1 part per million. So what you do is take that measured time-weighted average of the 6 parts per million and divide it by that occupational exposure limit that you're referencing, which is the OSHA permissible exposure limit of 1 part per million, and that's going to give you a 6 for the exposure factor. So now you want to make sure that you use a respirator that has an assigned protection factor of at least 6. And so in OSHA's chart, that's going to be the 10 or above. I just want to emphasize this like a little bit more because it does get a little bit confusing. So your required assigned protection factor, you're taking the actual exposure that you measure and you're putting it over your occupational exposure limit. Another area where these values come into play are for your maximum use concentration. So this is going to be the maximum amount of some sort of hazard that you can be exposed to while wearing your respirator. And in that case, you're going to take that occupational exposure limit and multiply it by your assigned protection factor. So we're just going to walk through it just one more time, just talking about APS, because I really do find that this is where people get slipped up a lot. So for a different, this one I just did some other simple math. But so if you got some worker exposure that was 100 parts per million, and the exposure limit that you were referencing was 10 parts per million, you would take that 100 parts per million exposure that you identified or measured, and then you would divide it by that occupational exposure limit, the 10. And so that's going to give you a 10. And now it's your required protection is the assigned protection factor of 10. And so that means you can use basically any one of these, right? You're choosing the respirator with a greater than equal to assigned protection factor of 10. That's going to be all of these. And then the trick comes into making sure that whatever respirator you're using is equipped with the appropriate filter or cartridge for your hazard. So this probably, now that I'm kind of walking through it, maybe I should have done this part first, but these are the different types of respiratory protection. I have seen some sort of interesting advancements sort of in the post-COVID world, but I haven't seen anything that really fundamentally alters these definitions, at least yet. So there's our elastomeric full and half face mask respirators right here. And then there's our filtering face piece respirators. These are going to be commonly referred to here in the US, at least, as the N95. But it is really important to note that N95 is a designation about the filtering face piece respirators resistance to oil, and then about its filter efficiency. So that N95 actually means that it can't be used with oil, so no oil. It doesn't have that resistance, and that its filtration efficiency is only 95%. So this is actually the very lowest level of respiratory protection that gets approved by NIOSH. So thinking of these filtering face piece respirators, there are several levels above that. So you can go, it's like a 9 chart. I can't see what my next slide is. I hope it's not this chart because that's going to be a little bit funny. But so there's N, there's R, which means it has some resistance to oil, and then there's P, which means it's oil proof. And then the designations for filtration efficiency, you can go from to 95 for each of those levels of oil resistance, and you can go to 99, and then you can go to 100. So there's N95, N99, N100 for filter efficiency. Then you see our powered air purifying respirators. And so those come in both a tight and a loose fitting. And then our supplied air respirators, or then the combination, so our SCBAs. Looks like my mouse is like way behind. Sorry, guys. So self-contained breathing apparatuses, or then the ones that can convert into both. So can be the SCBA or can be the supplied air / air purifying. So go back down, like they can convert down to what is basically the elastomeric full face respirator equipped with the appropriate filters. Okay, so yes, this was talking about those different levels. So just know that N95 is that lowest level. And the reason I want to emphasize this so much is just during the pandemic, for a long time, N95s were not available, but you could still go and purchase P100 respirators. They were still available. And it seemed like a lot of hospitals weren't aware of this, and how that would be even more effective, at least from a filtration efficiency standpoint, right? So yeah. As far as your filter selection, this is supposed to be a very helpful chart for picking out, based on your hazard, what sort of filter you need. Now, one interesting thing is we have those same levels that we saw with the filtering face piece respirators. These are obviously things that are available for your half and full face respirators too, to attach as filtration. And they have a color coding associated with them, right? And for the record, it's very interesting, but the filtering face piece respirators don't have to follow this color coding. So they're exempt from it. They don't fit into it. And I reached out to NIOSH and asked why, and I was just told that they don't really know why. So I don't know why they allowed those manufacturers to break away from this, but in the other world where you're buying just the filters for your respirator, it's going to follow this color coding. Although I do have a little bit of a personal pet peeve with what they call purple, which we'll see later. Oh, see right here. Okay. So one thing that happened to me very recently that I wanted to bring to everyone's attention is the existence of a lot of counterfeit filters on the market. So I would love for just a couple people I know we only have the question and answer, and I know it's going to be super annoying for you.
That's okay.
But I would love for you to tell me which one you think. So do you think the filter on the left, or do you think the filter on the right is the counterfeit one? And if you've already seen me do this, then don't cheat. So, okay, so we've got one vote for left. Anyone gonna say right? Who thinks? And if you want to throw in there, George, what you think makes it counterfeit, I would love to know your reasoning here, because I consider myself pretty well educated in this field. And when we first got these filters in, I didn't notice anything wrong with them. But we started doing fit testing with our AeroFit with them, and we were failing way too many tests. It just wasn't making any sense. And after a while, we realized it was the filters. Well, our procurement office is not well educated in our field. And that's sort of my fault. They're just very distinct departments, and I should have made an effort to sort of train on our procurement, right? Because basically our procurement has the job of going and getting us the best deal, right, on these filters. And so they found the best deal on these filters, and that was well below market price for 3M filters, which I would have noticed if I had been involved in that process, right? But I wasn't. And so these came from basically think like an Amazon type site. One of them actually, I think, came specifically from Amazon. And I would have never bought my filters that way, right? Like I've always used a vendor. I've always gone to the mass manufacturer, and I recognize that there's some expense there, but that's because you are paying for some quality and some control of the process, I think. But so yeah, these were both counterfeit actually. So it's not left or right, it was both of them. They both turned out to be counterfeit. And even sort of looking at them now, I can't tell you how you would identify that, except that they did not have the level of filter efficiency that they should have. As a matter of fact, they had very poor filter efficiency, very poor.
So if you do buy off of Amazon, then you should like make sure that it says 3M.
Make
at
sure
the
that it's
top, like-
actually from the 3M store if they're the ones
Yeah.
that's doing that. And like if you're getting filters for 30 or 60 cents a piece, just know that that's not those are not real those are not real filters, right? That's not putting there is a lot of science. Filter almost makes it sound like a simple process because we can think about, like our coffee filter maybe or whatever else. And that's not what we're working with here. There's a lot more going on behind this where they're trying to up filter efficiency while keeping a low breathing resistance. And it's a lot of work, and that costs money.
Sure.
And so then filters shouldn't be outrageously expensive, but they're gonna cost you a little bit. So just understand that.
Gotcha.
Okay, so we do get back a little bit into medical evaluation. I think I saw a couple people. Yeah, so someone just dropped in the chat, like, so there's no visual check. There are visual checks, and some filters are very obviously counterfeit because they don't have the appropriate markings. But those appear to me, at least, to have the appropriate markings. And I went back and checked NIOSH. NIOSH has some references on this, and it had all the markings that NIOSH said it should have. So I'm just warning you that you can do a visual check. Now, I will say once I had a real filter in my hand, you can feel a difference. Like it almost felt like the other ones were maybe just stuffed with cotton balls. Like once I got my hands on it, I could really feel a difference. But if you're just using the filters that you've just bought, you don't have that ability to compare, and you're just not thinking about it. So this is just I think we talked pretty much enough about medical evaluation, but just understand that what it's doing is confirming that an employee is going to be capable of wearing a respirator without it putting so much burden on them as to become a hazard in and of itself, right? The need for follow-up is going to be based on whether the doctor has given them some recommendation, or like we saw in the chat, if the Ahmed clinic has its own limitations, or I think I saw someone else put in there, certain responses might trigger a particular interval. And then we have linked here the medical evaluation questionnaire, which is going to be that first step of going through that questionnaire, and sort of depending on your answers there will depend on how involved your clearance has to be.
We will share the slides in the follow-up email.
Yes. As well as a template for
As
the
a
program.
template, yeah.
Yes.
Later.
Okay, so before any of your evaluations take place, you're going to need to send your healthcare provider, right? Because yes, they're evaluating this person, but they also need to know things about both the respirator and the type of work that's going to be performed. So they're going to want a copy of your actual respiratory protection program, typically. They're going to want to know the type and the weight of the respirator, how often and for how long your employees are going to have to wear it, how difficult the work is that they're doing, if they're having to wear any other PPE that might, increase the physiological burden, right? And then what are your temperature and humidity extremes at work? Interestingly, I did just read a paper from Thomas Bernard and a few other authors where they did some research, and respirator use didn't increase the heat like burden, which I was really surprised by. But I know that other types of PPE absolutely can. And so then I don't know if there's the perception even of that breathing resistance. And then also some people experience a little bit of claustrophobia when they put on that respirator. And I know that can, even if it's not like actually putting burden on, it can feel like it is. And I feel like that's enough to trigger a physical response.
Yeah.
Like that's just my experience. I'm not a medical doctor, but that's just my experience, and I do think that matters. I saw another person put something in the chat about if you've gained or lost 20 pounds. I do think that would very much impact your health, but I've never seen that as being the trigger for needing a new medical evaluation. However, that is one of the triggers for needing another fit test. So if you gain or lose more than 20 pounds, you should get another fit test. Now, I will say, if I had a colleague gain 20 pounds, it's going to be very difficult for me to go up to them and say, hey, how about that? How about that fit test? Like, that doesn't really feel like that.
Yeah, maybe don't do that.
So you really have to explain to your people the importance of the fit test, because you really want it to be their decision, right? Like, they're going to be so concerned about their safety, and they're going to recognize the value of the fit test. So they come to you with that and they say, hey, I've had a weight change. I'd like to redo my fit test because I know how important this is. That's a culture thing, and we're not doing a talk on culture today, so I'll keep it short. But that's just an idea. That's the next webinar. So fit testing. Hopefully, if you're in this, then you're super interested in fit testing. But fit testing is when you're going to use an approved protocol that's technology specific. So whether it's qualitative or under the umbrella of quantitative, if it's controlled negative pressure or condensation nuclei counting or ambient aerosol. You're going to use the appropriate protocol that's going to evaluate the fit of a specific respirator on a specific individual. And this is going to do several things. I mean, it's going to ensure that the respirator can provide the level of protection that you're expecting, but it also is going to help you, verify training, right? Can your person don their respirator appropriately? Gives you a, check on learning. You can ask them a couple questions about the respirator. When are you using this? How are you maintaining it? Make sure that some of that training broke through, right? And so we're very partial, of course, to fit testing here. So qualitative fit testing. This is when you're going to rely on the person's ability to sense some sort of testing agent. The benefits here are that it's very relatively inexpensive and that it's very low maintenance. The cost there, like the trade-off there, is that it is not very precise. It's subjective. So you are relying on the person to say that they sense the test agent. I hate that we write this way, but I haven't come up with a better way to do it. But it is subject to cheating, right? And I always bring up the story years and years ago when I worked at a hospital. I was testing 2,500 employees a year qualitatively. And let me tell you, I had forearms of steel, and I have learned subsequently that I wasn't even doing the testing correctly. Like, I was doing the testing how I was taught. I was 18 years old, went into this role. I was doing the testing how I was taught, or how I thought I was taught, I'm 18.
Sure.
And now I know that you have to recharge that hood, and you have to, make sure you're doing the sensitivity test. And when you do one puff and they say, oh, I tasted it, that's not enough. Like, we really want to make sure that we're getting, it's not that it's a horribly cumbersome process. All fit testing has some difficulty involved, but it is cumbersome. Like, it does take a lot of time, and just be prepared for that. Allow yourself enough time. I would say at least 15 minutes per test, and that's what you can probably expect until you have some of the hiccups. So these are some of the OSHA approved. Well, these are all of the OSHA approved methods of qualitative fit testing. So isoamyl acetate, which is going to be a smell test, and it's the smell of bananas. And I've done this before when I went to a respirator fit testing course years ago, but I've never seen it performed out in the wild. I've never seen it done out in the wild. And we are actually currently looking for an expert to speak on this. Sorry, shameless plug. We're looking for an expert to speak on this. So if you know anyone who is using the isoamyl acetate banana oil method, who might be willing to come speak to the ISO committee on respirator fit test methods, we would love to have that person come and speak to us, because we feel like we've lost some legacy knowledge in that area, and we want to make sure that's what's reflected in ISO also is what is appropriate out in the field. I digress a little bit, but do let me know. Then the two sort of most common methods are saccharin and bitrix. So those are both taste-based, and one is sweet. Saccharin is sweet, and bitrix is bitter. Between the two, I prefer the bitter, but it's because you can kind of see a reaction, and which to me feels a little bit more honest. But I'm sure you can fake that too. The one I did at the hospital was saccharin, and I swear to you, for years after I worked there, I could taste saccharin. I had like it's like nightmare fuel of the saccharin. But so if the person detects that during the test, then the respirator fit is deemed, inadequate. And then if they don't, then you get assigned basically a fit factor of 100. And that means that it's limited to only those respirators having a reference passing fit factor of 100 or less. And that's the half mask respirator. So all of your half mask elastomeric and all of those filtering face piece respirators. Irritant smoke, the one that is the one with the asterisk by it, is sort of a weird issue for me. Irritant smoke is, uh-oh.
Hmm. Can you still hear us? Oh, I think it's just this. Sorry, we're having some weird technical difficulties. Thank you. Thank you, Caleb. Thank you, everyone. Continue.
Okay, that was weird. It gave us a horrible warning. Uh, basically, acted like the whole thing was going to crash. So the one with the asterisk, irritant smoke, this is just sort of a bad idea. Like it is a toxin. So that means that when you're testing people, you're exposing them to something that is actually toxic. That's very counterintuitive in the industrial hygiene world. Like I don't think it's a good idea.
Sure.
Another thing is that I see this method get used incorrectly. So overexposing people to the irritant smoke, and then also using it for things like N95 respirators. Well, that's not an appropriate test there because an N95 is not an appropriate means of filtering out the irritant smoke. So even if they don't react to it, there's still likely some exposure going through that respirator, even if it is an appropriately fitting respirator. So I say, like the Stephanie Lynch recommendation, don't do irritant smoke. NIOSH says don't do irritant smoke. OSHA says it's still okay. And I will say a lot of people like it, especially our firefighters, because you get a real genuine reaction and you can't fake it. So this one actually, I mean, I guess you could cheat it, right? You could just pretend to react, but yeah, it would be much harder.
Hey, we had one quick question I want to get to while we're on qualitative. We have a few more that we will get to towards the end, but should we still be doing qualitative fit testing at all, given the subjectivity of the test method, says Peter?
I mean, we sell quantitative respirator fit testing instrumentation at OHD. So we obviously, we actually have sold qualitative kits before too. I'm not sure if we do anymore, but yeah, yes, there is still space in the respirator fit testing world for qualitative because there just are some places that are doing a level of fit testing or have a level of hazard that it's going to be too much of an investment to go for quantitative. I do believe that there are things like that. That being said, I have seen tons of places, like for instance, the hospital that I worked at, that absolutely had the resources to invest in quantitative fit testing and chose not to. And I think that was a sacrifice to both the safety of their employees and I just think that was a bad idea. Okay, I do see another question since we're still on quantitative. So for full face, I want to use saccharin or bitrix to also give confidence in the mask. Would you also do a quantitative test too? Okay, that's sort of an interesting choice. I never thought about this, but in the Army, they do this thing. This makes me think of this, but in the Army, they do this thing where, and I'm not advocating for this, but like my husband's challenge with his respirator before he ever got fit tested was to get sent into a room with tear gas with his full face respirator on, and then, perform some actions, and then he had to lift up his mask to get exposed to the tear gas. So I see the benefit here of you're saying like this person gets to gain some confidence in their mask, because if you tell them they're not supposed to be able to taste it, and then, they can taste it or whatever, then maybe that would help them build confidence. So if you're going to do that, I think that could be a good confidence builder. But absolutely, yes, if you're using a full face respirator, you're much better off doing the quantitative fit test, because if you were to test it with just the qualitative, you're sacrificing the level of protection that you're able to use it for. So if you test it with qualitative, then you're only going to be able to use it for those it's going to get assigned a 100 reference passing fit factor. So now you've limited to only being able to use things where that's going to be appropriate. And that's typically not what, your full face has the ability to go up to that 500. It has a assigned protection factor of 50. Then we do that safety factor of 10. Try not to think about it too hard. And that gets you up to that reference passing fit factor of 500. So now once you go above that level, you're able to use it against, more intense hazards. So you should be doing quantitative fit testing to be able to get that. Also, that's sort of a weird space where, yes, you're able to do that with a full face respirator. You're taking that sacrifice, but that is something that's not written directly in the standard. It's actually in a letter of interpretation. So that does become a little bit more difficult to sort of navigate from a compliance perspective. Like technically it's okay, but it's definitely not a best practice. Okay. Moving into, do you think I should answer more questions or go into?
No, I think that's good. These can, Tim and Darren, we are going to answer your questions, we promise. We're just here for time. Continue.
So quantitative fit testing, obviously, if the benefits of qualitative are that it's less expensive and requires less maintenance than with quantitative, we're talking about a more of an investment, and then it's going to require maintenance, which is typically an annual calibration. With that, though, you're going to get the precision of an actual number given to you, and you can, with quantitative, you can go through some tests to help build people's confidence in their respirators. Both methods are going to have a means of you. So with CNC, you're going to be able to go into like a real-time fit mode where it's going to be able to show you, so you can have the person, move the mask on their face or make, because this is not part of the fit test, so you're not beholden to the same requirements. You can move it around your face. You can put maybe a safety pin in the side, and it can help build that confidence when you see the difference in the fit factor, right? And then with CMP, you can do the seal check. That's going to help you, feel how the mask is fitting. And then you can do the same thing. You can run a step, because the machine doesn't require you to just roll through the test like CNC does. You can just run a step and you can do the same thing, put a paper clip in there, or adjust the mask on your face, bend in a side, and you're going to be able to see when it's leaking, and that's going to help give you some confidence in your fit. Another thing that quantitative is going to do is provide instant documentation, and then it is way faster. So we are talking about both of these tests. The tests themselves are very short, 2.5 minutes or less. In my opinion, CMP is less time, but I'm sure I've had CMP tests that took 2.5 minutes, because there's a little bit more variability there. CNC tests, those fast fit modified protocols are really, they're exactly the 2.5 minutes. So 2 minutes and 29 seconds or something like that.
Yep.
So I think I covered this pretty well. It's objective. It's going to provide that numerical value, the fit factor, and this can be used, depending on the method, on any tight fitting respirator. There is another type that's called generated aerosol, and that is mostly seen in labs. There is a portable method of generated aerosol fit testing that I've seen with the military. It's called the JSMLT, but when they say portable, I mean, I think it's 90 pounds, and it's just it's a real bugger to work with. So you don't see that a lot.
Sure.
You don't see that outside the military. But so CMP, that's going to be control negative pressure. It's going to use air as the challenge agent, and it's going to be directly measuring leak rate, because once it sets that controlled negative pressure, any air it has to remove to maintain that is equivalent to whatever amount of air is leaking into the respirator. Then with CNC, you're using ambient aerosols or you're producing aerosols in a room, you're using those as the challenge agent, and you're counting, you're either probing the respirator or you're using probes that attach through a adapter. That's another thing. CMP, you're also using adapters that are going to adapt the mask to that technology. With ambient aerosol, you're either using an adapter to create a probe behind the filter, or you're directly probing the respirator. I've seen both. And then you're counting the amount of aerosol inside and outside the respirator, and that's how you're determining leakage. Yes, so port count is CNC.
As is the Aerofit.
Oh, thank you.
I'm the
Proper.
manager.
So OHD has a newer CNC instrument. It's called the Aerofit. So proper use of your respirator. This is going to be, the routine stuff that comes up with maybe every day or every other day. And then foreseeable emergencies means any kind of emergency situation that you have reason to believe could come up. As far as I have someone who's dropped in the chat, how long do we keep our fit test records? The requirement is only for the year that they are valid. I think that's crazy because I've had OSHA come into my facility, and even though that's the requirement, it almost felt like because I didn't have more than that, they were like, but did the fit testing happen? And they, interviewed employees, which luckily I had good employees and we had a good, culture, and it was fine. But just know that if it's me, I would keep them longer. And when you're doing it quantitatively, they all go into software, so there's really no harm in keeping them for quite some time.
Yeah.
Again, no requirement, but good practice. Good practice. Again, OSHA's that bare minimum level. So another thing you need to remember about your respirators is that you're going to have to care for them appropriately and store them appropriately. So this is going to be based on manufacturer's recommendation. Your vendor who is selling you these respirators, you need to develop that good relationship with them and lean on them, right? Like you are their customer, and they should be providing you with the ability, to well care for your respirator. Some come with, the appropriate bag that they should be kept in. Some have particular wipes that are maybe a type of disinfectant that's best for the material that the respirator is made of. Do know that a lot of disinfecting materials, no matter what, can eventually degrade some of these materials. So, a respirator doesn't just last forever just because it's not disposable. They just last a lot longer. And so recognize that there is probably even an expiration date. I don't think I've ever kept mine long enough to have an expiration date, but just know that they aren't going to last forever, especially if you are appropriately disinfecting them. Another big undertaking here is training. So your training is going to have to be understood, and then it has to teach your people at least these listed things, right? So why they're wearing the respirator, what it can and can't do, how to inspect it, how to don and doff it, how to use it, how to check the seal. So that user seal check is a requirement for every time you don the respirator. I have to admit, I have never seen that happen, but that is what you're supposed to do, and it is what I do. When I have to wear my respirator, I do perform my user seal check every time. You want to know how to use it if you are going to have emergency situations, foreseeable emergency situations. Understand how if it's not fitting you well, or if you haven't performed the appropriate maintenance, what that does to your respirator's ability to protect you. And then we already talked about maintenance and storage. And then what either your state or federal OSHA, what the requirements are based on that respiratory protection standard. So you're going to have to do retraining if you have any changes in your workplace or in the respirator. So if you are moving to a new work assignment that has different hazards, if new hazards are introduced, if something happens where you see that someone has forgotten how to use their respirator, which a big sign here, when you do that annual fit test is when someone walks in and they can't don their respirator appropriately. They obviously need to be retrained. This is not uncommon. This is something, if you're not someone who's wearing your respirator regularly, you can just kind of get out of the habit, develop bad habits, and that's just something that can happen. So be aware of that. Our firefighters, they're wearing their respirators often, they're checking their stuff, and that's just a different environment there. As far as your program evaluation, I mentioned that hazard assessment piece is going to have that same loop, right? You're checking your hazards, you're implementing controls, and then you're reevaluating at a specific interval. You can do that. You can have some audits. Anytime you have any sort of change, you're going to do a program evaluation, and then just at some sort of interval for a review, which ideally if you could do it annually, but I don't think that's as practical. Like it seems like you might be able to, maybe when you're doing your fit testing, depending on how you're coordinating your fit testing, if it's like one big lump based on you not having that many people, or if it's, scattered out throughout the year. And you can do that with your review process too, right? Like maybe you only review the fit testing portion in February, and then you only review the hazard assessment portion in, April, and you can split those parts up.
Okay. Oh,
Okay.
look at us.
Whew. I was really trying to do it with 10 minutes left, and so it probably sounded like I was flying through a little bit of the last, but I saw we already had some questions. Okay, Darren, apologize for the delay here. So when you have multiple departments, each with different needs, can the responsible person split up the responsibilities to those departments? Yes, as long as they are all reporting to one central person who is deemed the Respirator Protection Program administrator, right? So that's perfectly fine. Tim, would you recommend that the company assign the Respiratory Protection Program administrator in writing? Oh, yes. This is something that absolutely needs to be designated in writing, and your program should list this person by name in the program. As far as who the person is making the assignment, I mean, it needs to be someone who has the authority to hold that person accountable. So for me, the higher the better. Like the CEO could be the one who's assigning this, because they should have an investment in this program. I mean, this is a big deal. So so for me, sort of the higher the better, but whatever's appropriate. Their frontline manager. It also shouldn't be something that you're sloughing off on someone. So if you're the manager of a department and you have an executive assistant and you're like, I'm just going to get my executive assistant to do this administration, right? Because she's an administrator. No, most likely that person does not have the appropriate training to manage this. So unless you're going to invest in them and give them these skills to do that, which you absolutely can, and recognize that now they are not, an executive assistant, they're an executive assistant slash respiratory protection program administrator. There's just a big difference there. How common are disposable tight-fitting respirators and how they differ from reusable? Okay. Disposable respirators are those filtering face piece respirators, and they are very common. Especially in healthcare, they were what almost everyone was using to protect themselves against COVID in the healthcare system. So very common. And the way that they differ is that they are made up entirely of the filtration media. I don't even know. I guess if I go back, get to that slide. So they're made up entirely of, this is an example of one. So this is one of those filtering face piece respirators. This is one that's disposable. And then the elastomeric respirators are made of an elastomeric, material, and they're going to have typically like a wider sealing surface. According to OSHA, they have the same assigned protection factor. I would say if you have worn these respirators, then I would have to just fundamentally disagree with that. I feel like my elastomeric half mask respirator provides me more protection than my filtering face piece respirator. Now, part of that is a little bit of perceived resistance. It's almost like I go, okay, this is a little bit harder to wear, and that makes me think it's doing its job a little more effectively. So, but it's barely noticeable. Like I said, I do still feel that resistance with the filtering face piece respirators, which is why I'm a little bit surprised that OSHA is trying to do away with the medical clearance. But so these, you can see both. These are made up entirely of that filtration material. And that's what's going entirely on your face and you're breathing through. And then with the elastomeric half mask, these are having filters attached. So this is your, filter media, and it's attaching to the respirator. So that's what you then are disposing of and reattaching a new one. So that's the difference there. Okay.
This is the follow-up question for this person, by the way. who just asked, oh, well, that the question you just answered.
In the past, the plant used 3M disposable elastomeric half mask respirators. I've never heard of a disposable elastomeric half mask respirator, so I'm not sure. Can't answer that one.
Okay, let's go.
Cool. Is it required to be third-party audit or can be self-audit by the program? It can be self-audit. Now, I think it is good to have someone from the outside come and audit. And one thing, I've worked for companies where we had different sites and we would invite people from another site to come perform that audit. But yes, I think it's fine from a compliance perspective, but I think it's a good idea to have some outside auditing. Okay, can you explain OSHA Appendix D, information for employees using respirators when not required under the standard? Okay, so that's something called voluntary use. And for voluntary use, this is when you don't have a hazard that would require a respirator to be in use, but the employee is choosing to still wear one. So maybe trying to think of a good example of this. Maybe they feel like they can still smell something. So for instance, here at OHD, we have adapters that get soldered with a little metal bit here in house. And one of the people who was doing that said that they could smell it and that it was bothering them. Well, we did the air monitoring and it's well below any sort of exposure limit. Well below any exposure limits, not just the permissible exposure limit, well below ACGIH, being very conservative. We're, of course, your protection, our priority.
Yeah.
Also, our protection, our priority. All right. So we're gonna take care of our people. But it was well below. Well, if that employee had then decided that they still wanted to wear a respirator because they would just feel better about it, that would be voluntary use. So you can do that when it's not required under the standard. Now that changes everything. Like my understanding is that I think you still have to do the medical clearance and maybe don't have to do the fit testing, or maybe I've gotten those flip-flopped. I'm so sorry. If that's important enough to you, Ken, please write me an email and I will clear up that distinction. Okay. Next one, I also designate my RPP assistants in writing. They do the majority of my testing and documentation. Perfect, Jean. That's a great call. Next, earlier there was a mention of possible changes to the medical exam requirements for loose fitting PAPRs. When will these take place? So my understanding is that they will be posted for a notice of public rulemaking in August. Then the public will have a chance to respond. And I don't know how much they base it on the responses, but as long as nothing crazy happens, then at the next I can't remember how many, they might give you 90 days. I can't remember how long it has to be posted. Then at the end of those 90 days, that it would kick into place and OSHA would release something about that. Okay. Any recommendations for annual fit testing renewal dates? Is it easier to renew in the birthday month of the employee? This just depends on your specific company, like how many employees do you have? How does the fit testing take place? Is it in-house? Is it, you're having to coordinate with an outside person? That controls all of that. But using birthday month is a good idea if it ends up splitting them up pretty evenly and you do have it in-house. And so that helps keep your workload kind of at a steady pace. That can be something. Okay, what's next? 3M elastomeric half mask would be, yeah, who go up a little bit? Who is that? I'm sorry, Dornier or Dornier? I don't understand exactly what you're saying there. Caleb says for facial hair, is the NIOSH CDC image guide okay to follow? Yes, it's not only okay to follow, it is what you should follow. If facial hair falls under the seal of the respirator, then that respirator should not be, you should not even do a fit test. It doesn't matter if you were able to pass a fit test. If there's facial hair under that seal, then don't. Anonymous, how often should you have employees sign off on a voluntary use form? I think incorporating it into your annual training is a good idea. As far as how often should you, I think that the initial sign off is actually enough according to the standard. And then only if something changes, right? So maybe they stop for a while and then they decide to do it again. You would need to then have another voluntary use form. Thank you. I really hope I feel like I'm not going to get this name right. Sanaki, speaking to the whether the fit test and the medical clearance were required for voluntary use, this person should suggest that it's neither. Neither is required, and that may be true. Tim, in my experience, are respirator wearers allowed to contribute their input into the annual program evaluation as required? I mean, they better be. I don't know who's going to know more about how the respirator use is going than the people who are using them. This is one thing that I've always found very strange. So there is an aspect of another regulation from OSHA that's about bloodborne pathogens. And it very explicitly states that you need to get input from these end users for all these things. And for some reason, that's not as explicitly mentioned in a lot of these other standards, but I think it should be because I think you should be reaching out to these end users and getting their feedback. Like, how is this respirator working for you? Have you heard about any new things? One thing that I used to love to do at a company I had, we would have a safety stand down day and we would have vendors come out who we were not using and the vendors that we were using, and we'd have the employees go around, and then there were little evaluations they could fill. I mean, they were normal size evaluations.
Sure.
But they would fill out to say, what was your favorite respirator? What was your favorite glove? Why? What do you think we need for this? And I just thought it was a very rewarding experience, and people felt like even when you couldn't buy what they wanted, it still felt like they were being included.
Yeah.
Okay, should folks that perform fit testing be certified? Yes, but that's a trick question because there is no official certification in place. There are some courses you can take. Dr. Roy McKay offers some. That's who I always mention because he's just who I'm most familiar with. I have not taken his course, so I'm not speaking to its rigor, but you should have someone they should do something to figure out that they are certified. I will say OHD, for our fit testing equipment, we offer the ability of you to go through what we call OHD Academy, and that comes with a certification to perform whichever type of fit testing equipment you have or both. But I have heard whisperings of a national certification test, and now I've heard it from all over the place. So I don't know if it's something that will come to fruition, but I do hope it does. Okay, thank you, Caleb. Yes, fit testers should refuse to test if there's facial hair under the seal, but not necessarily if there is any facial hair. Don't worry, we understand. We do a lot of firefighters and specialized police, and the mustaches are I think they're issued to them. I think they have to have the mustache. Yes.
Yes.
Okay. My understanding is that the loose fitting PAPRs only require a medical questionnaire unless the reviewing the medical evaluation. Yeah, so that's what's going to change. My understanding is that they wouldn't even require the medical questionnaire. Like the questionnaire is the first step in the medical clearance process, but all of that is medical clearance. And so if this rule were to go through, then there will no longer be any part of that medical clearance process required for the loose fitting PAPRs. Who decides when to change the respirator cartridges? Whew, buddy, Marlon, that is a tough one. So one good thing, maybe not good thing. One thing about respirators is that the more you use them, typically with these filters at least, then the better they're going to get at filtering because they're going to get stuff. But that means that breathing resistance is going to increase. So once it gets hard to breathe through, you're going to know that you need to change those filters. I'm not recommending that as a policy. I just know that that's one thing that can happen. And obviously that's not going to work for then your, cartridges, because those are based on adsorption into some sort of material. Sometimes when people change those is when they start to either sense the chemical or whatever. So that's called breakthrough. Once you get that, then they'll change their cartridges. That is not a best practice because that means that you're either increasing breathing resistance or you're getting some level of exposure. So usually you sort of calculate a sort of worst case scenario, and you can do filter change out schedules or cartridge change out schedules based on that schedule. Other people change them just much more frequently. And then the place that I would sort of lean heavily into is your vendor for your respirators and or your filters based on whatever the manufacturer is going to tell you to do. Yes, Ken. So follow your manufacturer guidelines, but I have seen those not be great. Now, the big the big companies that we all heard of, they're pretty good. Like 3M's, I've seen change out schedules. It's been years since I've looked, but they were very good. Okay, what about goatees that do not interfere with the seal of the respirator or mustaches only allowed? I mean, I've seen goatees that sort of stop. I feel like you can't get a good visual of me, but like stop at the chin, like stop at the chin. So if that respirator sealing surface goes behind that, then to me that would be fine. It's where the goatee interferes with the seal of the respirator. I do think your goatee would have to be quite narrow. Is that maybe
Yeah.
maybe the right word? But
Is there like a CDC
yes.
or NIOSH? Like,
yes, someone even
yeah,
asked about
we'll
that. There is a
send that to you
NIOSH
if you
graphic.
tell us who you are, or if you email me, we will send it to you.
Yes, there's a NIOSH graphic for which facial hair is allowed.
There it is, Caleb. Thank you. Caleb
So
just
helpful.
posted.
Can
He's the
everyone
best.
see?
MVP, yes. So they can see if I hit answer live, they should be able to see.
Okay.
If you can't see what Caleb posted for some reason, let me know, but I think you can.
Well, that's all I got, folks.
Great.
Only 5 minutes over.
Yeah. Hey everybody. Thank you all so much for being here, for being lively in the Q&A, and for sticking around after 2 p.m. We are going to send a recording. We are going to send the slides, and we are going to send you a template to write your own respiratory protection program. We created this based off of a few state ones. Your state has its own guidelines, right? So it's like
Some states do, like the one I used to follow or that I liked the best was from Washington's Labor and Industry. But and I think that's what we used mostly as a reference, because that's so when I worked at a steel mill, that's where I was, and that was where I had my most evolved respiratory protection program. I see a couple more questions. Should I just? Oh,
we got time here. If you need to hop off, hop off.
So understand there's a difference between cleaning and sanitizing respirators, but with regards to PAPRs, especially in industrial environments, with hexchrome or cadmium, how often to sanitize? I mean, I would sanitize it every use, but you need to check the manufacturer's recommendations for that, especially for what to sanitize with, because depending on whether you're using like loose fitting, I mean, based on things you're talking about, you should be using probably tight fitting, but that's going to really change the material possibly for how it's creating that seal, and that also impacts that material's susceptibility to how you're sanitizing it. Okay, if employees use multiple type respirators requiring fit test, they must be conducted for each one? Yes. You must test on every respirator that they are having to use. And you have to do that annually, at least annually.
That's great. So many people saying thank you.
Good. Thanks,
Thank
guys.
y'all for showing up. Hey, also, we do have Stephanie's written a lot of blogs. If you're still here, thank you. God bless you. Stephanie has written a lot of blogs on OHD's site regarding medical clearance, N95. That's new to us. So, like, we're, adding some more blogs there. You wrote something on PAPRs.
I did.
Yeah, so I would definitely check out our website if you'd like to learn more on any of these subjects. Including there is a blog on how to write a respiratory protection program. But now you're experts, so you don't even need it. Okay, thank you.
It's so easy now. Can't you tell? Can't you tell?
Oh gosh. Thanks for joining, and we will send y'all a follow-up by tomorrow. Thanks.